Yes, good. Correct. Okay, so what is the goal of financial planning? To be financially independent. So now what happens if you are financially independent? So you've got all the assets and liabilities covered quite comfortably in terms of having more assets and liabilities. And now what happens if you die? That stuff has to be given distributed. To be part of your estate, which will be taxed and distributed to your family members. Correct. Okay, so even for, let's say, estate planning, okay, what are we focusing on? Planning. All right, so is death something that we need to plan for? Yes. Potentially. Why? It's going to happen at some point in time. Okay, so estate planning is looking at all the wealth that you've created. Now, what are you going to be doing with it? Okay, who are you leaving it to? Who's going to get it? What are you actually going to do with that? Okay, have you thought about that? Not really. Yes. Well, let's say, who would you want to leave your wealth to? At this current stage, I don't have any kids. I'll leave my parents. And your brother? I'll leave it to my brother as well. As well? Okay. Yeah, really like my brother as well. Well, I'm just asking because you said parents, but you didn't mention your brother. Yeah. So do you not get on? No, we get along. Okay. He's got everything up, but got the same life activity, so. Okay. Another one of the same might be beneficial. Okay. All right. So yeah. So sure. Okay. So estate planning is generally what? Planning for death. Okay. Planning for when we pass, right? So obviously, as an individual, you're going to have to incur certain costs when giving goods to certain individuals. Okay. So be it family, be it friends, be it charity organizations, it could be anyone. Okay, estate planning is looking at that. Alright, so the first bit we need to discuss is this, an estate. Okay, so you have a pretty good idea of what estate planning is. It's looking at what? Your assets, your liabilities, and we're looking at the wealth that you're going to be leaving for others. Okay, and that's going to obviously incur certain taxes, as you said. Okay, estate duty would be something that would be applicable here for estate planning. Right, so what must we look at doing? Preserving or protecting the assets and liabilities, okay? Mainly the assets, okay? Hopefully the assets will pay off all the liabilities and you'll have something of value that you can give to your successors. Yeah, dependents, could be dependents, successors, it could be your kids, your parents, whoever. Okay, so something that needs to be considered here is transferring the estate. Is that done, let's say, without a fee, without a charge? Would it be done when the person's dead or afterwards? No, afterwards. Okay, when you actually transfer the assets through to the beneficiaries, then that would be done at a later stage. Yeah, so transferring the estate will carry a cost. Yes, the estate, the net estate after all the deductions and exclusions would be taxable, yes. Okay. Alright, so estate planning looks at what? Everything's sorted out and the person gets a car, or the individual receives a car and pay tax on the car as well. If you're receiving something from an estate, it would be deemed as being income. Yes, okay, because if you think about it, you're receiving something. Okay, there could possibly be an exemption there, depending on the situation, because sometimes they apply a rollover. So, for example, husband and wife. Okay, if the husband dies and the husband leaves the house to the wife, will the wife pay tax on that? No, she won't, because the rollover will apply. Okay, so she won't have to pay tax when she receives it, but she'll pay tax later, yes, when she eventually sells it or when she dies, perhaps. Okay, so you won't pay tax twice on it. Okay, so there are certain requirements in place that prevents things like that from happening. Okay, because obviously they want to try, how can I say, they want to tax your assets and liabilities when you die, but they don't want to make it too problematic that no one ever wants to leave anything for anyone else, if that makes sense. Okay, so the government tries to balance it, okay, in terms of how much tax do you actually pay on the assets and liabilities that you have. Okay. Alright, so what do we need to do from a financial planning point of view? We need to minimize costs. Okay, so transfer costs arise when you die and you're transferring your assets, your estate, okay, to other individuals. Right. We need to protect those assets. Okay, so why would we have a trust? A trust is one way of protecting certain assets. Okay, and we obviously need to provide sufficient funds which will add liquidity to the estate. Okay, so what happens if you're wanting to give away your house, okay, to one of your family members? Let's say you've got kids and you want to leave the house to the kids. Okay, if there isn't sufficient funds to pay for the expenses, i.e. the executor fees, what's going to happen to the house? It'll have to be sold, so you won't be able to give your house to your kids. Okay, so that's planning. Right, you need to plan ahead of time. So when you do die, your wishes are then going to be executed. Okay, right, so what impact will no estate planning have on personal assets? So what happens if you don't plan? Correct. It's basically like a free-for-all. Alright, so they then apply the law of succession and they then give your assets to loved ones or dependents, right, or immediate family members. Okay, so if there's no estate planning, you don't have a say. Okay, assets are given according to this the law of succession. Okay. Well, you don't know when you're going to die. Oh. Yes. Yeah, but did she have capacity to give away her assets before she died? Probably not. Yes. But did she then do all of that when she was still talking?
Well, not really.
Yes.
When she got into the brain, eventually everybody did different stuff.
Sure. Yeah. See, that's not good.
That isn't.
Yeah, because with a situation like that, the executor that you nominate for the actual estate has to carry out the wishes of the will. Okay, so did your grandmother have a will?
Yeah, she did, but I'm talking about the furniture and stuff. The finances were done with, think about parents and with it. She just gave everybody money.
Okay.
So I don't think that was in the will.
Okay, yeah. So the will be executed in terms of the executor. The executor will execute the will.
Yeah. I mean, like things like furniture and stuff.
Yes.
People just said, Grace, if you can have that, you can have that.
Okay.
Some things were.
Okay, well, as long as it's how can I say, agreed, and it doesn't create a lawsuit or a problem in the household, right? I don't see how that can create a problem.
No, it shouldn't.
Okay, it shouldn't, yeah. But normally, estate planning is done when you die. Okay, well, when you're alive, but it relates to when you die. So when you die, all this estate planning then happens, basically. Okay, right. So you get two types of trusts. Inter vivos, which is before your death. Okay, inter vivos is while you're still living. Okay, I think vivo means life, if I'm not mistaken, in Spanish. Okay,
I'm not sure.
yeah, vivo. That's like the polo vivo. Okay, yeah, vivo, as far as I remember, means life in Spanish. Okay, right. So forming a testamentary trust. Think about it. Testament. Okay, that's when you die. Okay, so after you die, the trust will be created. Okay, other estate planning considerations: liquidity, insurance policies, and wills. Right, those are things to consider in terms of planning. Okay, so if you don't have a will, your assets will just be given to the loved ones. Okay, according to law of succession. But if you have a will, you can give assets to whoever you want to give assets to. Okay. Right, so estate planning is a very, very, very specialized field, okay, because there's so much to consider in terms of assets and liabilities and what happens at well, on the death of that individual. Okay, at death, there's going to be a certain amount of, let's say, processes that needs to take place. Right, so estate planning, obviously you need to have objectives. I need to know what I'm doing. I need to take stock, i.e. I need to analyze what do we currently have. Okay, so how much do you have in terms of assets? Okay, and who gets those assets? Right, and also we need to look at the liabilities. If I die today, what costs are going to arise? Would my estate be liquid enough? Will I have enough liquidity in the estate to pay for all those assets? And that's why individuals normally take out life cover. Life cover can be used as a way to add liquidity to an estate. Okay. We need to choose techniques. Okay, we might need professionals to help us with structuring a trust. We might need a will. We might need succession planning. What happens if you're running a business? Okay, and you're the CEO. What happens when you die or when you leave? Okay, those are all things that you need to plan for. And obviously the most important bit is the implementation. Okay, we need to implement the plan. Okay. Alright, so what are some of the objectives we can set? Okay, so I want to hear what your objectives are. Right, it's probably long time from now. Okay, let's say eventually when you've reached a ripe old age of 100, okay, and you're on your deathbed. Okay, what would your objectives be in terms of heirs? Who would you want to give your assets to?
My kids, if they haven't died before me.
Okay, so you would give them the assets. Yeah. Would you give assets to charity?
I'm not really a person who do that. I'm keeping stuff in the family.
Okay, yeah, I'm just asking because if you look at objectives, certain individuals might have certain organizations as a beneficiary. Okay, so what happens if you really love pets and animals? You might leave a portion of your wealth to the SPCA. Possibly, okay. You could give some of your wealth away to those organizations. Right.
Sorry, it does sound a bit bad, but I'm a person that gets stuck in the family.
That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. Right.
Anytime it can be lost, like a breaking and stuff. So.
Okay. So what are your estate planning goals, objectives currently? Okay.
Maybe objectives in life for like to get a house and stuff.
Right. So currently, estate planning isn't important. Why? No dependents. You're very young, and it's not so much of a consideration. Yes. Okay. Do you have any heirs or beneficiaries? Okay, so no heirs, but beneficiaries. Good. Okay, so that's the difference. An heir would be someone who you fathered. Okay, beneficiaries would be what? Someone who you've nominated as being important to receive a certain payoff or payout from your estate. Okay, right. So what are they entitled to? They're entitled to your wishes. Okay, so your grants. Okay, what do you? They call it a bequest. Okay, what are you going to bequeath? Okay, what are you going to bequeath to your loved ones? Okay. Right, and should you give control of those assets to those individuals? That's another consideration. What happens, let's say, Robert, let's say you're a multi-millionaire, okay? But you're on your deathbed and you're 100 years old and you're about to die, okay? And you've got an 18-year-old, okay? All right? Okay. Let's say you went through like a midlife crisis or end of life crisis. And you fathered a child near your end of life. Okay, so now you've got this 18-year-old. Okay, and that's your only loved one. So during your entire life, you were focusing on business, and you've created this 100 million rand in wealth or dollars in wealth. And the only person that you have, okay, and this child of yours came from a girlfriend of yours. Okay, so you're not married to an individual, right? Okay, so the only direct, let's say, beneficiary in terms of heir would be who? Your son. Okay, your son would be your heir. So would you leave an 18-year-old with 100 million rand?
Not really, no.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at here in terms of control. Right, so you might say, well, I'm not going to leave 100 million rand or dollars, okay, to an 18-year-old. Why not? What would an 18-year-old do with $100 million?
You won't spend it in everything, cars, houses.
Okay, they're not going to be very responsible, right?
They don't have the financial background planning it yet.
Correct. Okay, so what do you then do? You could maybe set up a trust, and you could say, well, I'm going to use a trust to protect the 100 million, and the trust is going to they're going to control and be oversight for that particular fund. Okay, so the trust will then say, well, he can or she can only use this money for certain things. So for studying perhaps, okay, or for buying a property or a house, okay, but not for entertainment, okay, or wasteful expenditure. All right, and that could be something that you could create ahead of your death, okay, to protect your wealth and to make sure that your child is looked after long after you've died. Okay.
Good example there.
Okay.
I have an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I don't know. Well, does you said Hugh Hefner? Does Hugh Hefner have
I don't know.
very young kids? I don't know how old is he. How old is he? Do you know?
No, I don't, but I think
He's probably like what? Is he 80, 90 or is he that old?
I'm not sure, but he's got a very young girlfriend, a 50-year-old girlfriend.
Okay.
70 or something.
Okay, so he's around 70, possibly. I'm not sure.
Because he was in the news recently.
Yes, okay.
And he sold his mansion to
Oh, he did?
his neighbor for,
Okay.
I think it was $1 billion.
Okay. All right. So there, in terms of estate planning, maybe he should start looking at that if he's pretty old. Okay.
I'll look it up after we leave this one.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. In terms of taking stock, what do we need to do? We need to know, what do I actually have that I can potentially give away? And that's everything. That's your investments, that's your assets, that's everything that you've got. Okay. Your mansion, your property, your cars, your equipment, your machinery, everything. Okay, that's what you're looking at. Right, and then we're looking at establishing value. So we need to know, what is the actual value of the estate. And why do we do that? It's because of taxes. SARS wants to know how much you have in wealth. Okay, so what are some of your assets, property, or rights of use?
Current state, got TV, Wi-Fi, payment assets, hard drives, that's computer equipment and stuff.
Okay.
I don't have a car, I just drive my father's car.
Okay, so can you value the property of on your estate?
Yes.
Yes, you'd have to look at the market value. Okay, what could you actually get for those assets? Good. Right, next bit is looking at what is the actual estate that will be taxable. Okay, so the net estate is taxable, i.e. estate duty will be applicable to it. Okay, so if I'm looking at allowable deductions, certain things can be deducted, okay, from your estate to reduce your net estate. Okay, and how much is estate duty? It's 20%. Okay, it's the same as donation tax. Donation tax and estate duty is both 20%. Okay, do you know what the difference is between COP and ANC?
Well, but I don't know.
Okay, no, yeah. The matrimonial property regime is a marriage contract. Okay, so marriage is just a contract. Okay, if you decide to get married, you're going to have to decide on which contract do you want to sign, okay, with your wife. Okay, COP or ANC. Okay, COP stands for Community of Property. Yes, anti-nuptial contract, correct. So now, what's the difference? Community of property means what's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. Okay, ANC is what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. Okay, so ANC is where you have an accrual, perhaps, where if a husband and wife are getting married, assets are separated at the point they get married. Okay, anything thereafter they could use as a combination, okay, as a shared wealth. Okay, but before coming into the marriage, you have a certain amount of assets. Right, so if you leave the marriage, That's basically what you need to consider in terms of your wealth. Okay, but community property is, well, it doesn't matter what you come into the marriage with, it doesn't matter what I come into the marriage with, that's what we have as a couple, okay, as a married couple. Right, so if we look at matrimonial property regime, does that affect estate planning? Yes, it does. Okay, it does. Yeah, so if the husband is married to community of property, then assets of both of these, yeah. Okay. Right, other estate costs, you could have wills that carry a cost of the executor, advertising costs perhaps. What advertising cost do you have? You need to broadcast. No, okay, besides that, but you also need to post a yes, correct, a notice of death. Correct, yeah. Okay, transfer fees, cost of liquidating assets, master's executive fees, those are all part of the cost for estate duty. Okay, it's not estate duty, estate planning. Alright, so the estate liquidity is the biggest consideration. Why? We spoke about this earlier. What happens if you don't have enough cash to pay for all these costs?
You're going to have to sell the house.
Yes, your assets are going to have to be sold to cover the costs. And that can be problematic if you've nominated a beneficiary in the will for a certain asset.
Yeah, that will be.
They're not going to get anything.
Are there formulas in this for this about this?
No, you don't need to know these. I've just given you this as additional.
Oh, okay, because I'm still falling back. I'm not saying I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Okay, it's not something that's tested. Okay, the theory is tested, the workings isn't. Okay, but I've given it to you purely for information purposes. Right, so how much is estate duty? 20%. I only start paying estate duty if I exceed 3.5 million rand worth of assets. Okay, so if your net worth or wealth is less than 3.5 million, are you going to pay estate duty? No, because that'll be excluded, exempt. Okay. Right, property and deemed property both form part of your estate. Right, what would deemed property be? That's something like a life policy. Okay, obviously the life policy will only pay out when you die, but it's deemed property of the estate. Okay, gross estate minus allowable deductions gives you the net estate. Okay, then notice, the net estate is then subtracted by 3.5 and only what's left over will be taxable at 20%. Okay. No, the government gets a lot. Think about it. 3.5 million is not a lot. A house is what, 2 million? A million. Yeah, so let's just say if we average it out. Okay, let's say a house is 1.5. Okay, a few cars could make up another million. Okay, furniture, equipment, easily make up 3.5, possibly. Okay, so if we're looking at net estate, what are we looking at? After the allowable deductions, before the taxable amount. Okay, so wealthy families will have a lot more than 3.5. Okay, so now can you imagine having, let's say you have 103.5 million in assets. Okay, let's assume, right, 103.5 million in assets. How much will be taken out here? 3.5 million. How much will be taxable? 100 million. How much estate duty do you pay? 20 million. Right, so you're a wealthy individual. You've got 103.5 million rand in assets. The government's just going to take 20%, which is 20 million of your assets just because you died. Okay, and you're saying the government doesn't get much?
Yeah, in this case it will get a lot.
Okay. Okay. And there are some people in South Africa who are billionaires. So now can you imagine taking 20% of a billion?
That's 200 million, isn't it?
Okay, well a billion is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 20%, so 20 over 100, I would take away those two. So I'd take away 1 0 and I would put a 2 here. Okay, so that would be 200 million. 200 million, you're right. Okay, good mathematics there. Okay, so let's say, so you're an individual, right? If you look at the rich list in South Africa, okay, there are people in South Africa that are billionaires, right? So if you're a billionaire, right, and you die, 20% of a billion is 200 million. The government's going to get 200 million just because you died. Is that a lot?
That is a lot.
Okay, you see why estate planning is so important for wealthy individuals.
Sure.
Okay, that's why wealthy individuals have what? Trusts.
Yeah.
Because trusts protect their wealth. Because it takes the wealth away from their personal, let's say, assets, and it puts it in a trust. Okay.
Don't you think trust fees are high?
Yeah, trusts do carry certain charges because they're running like almost like they're institutions. They're running like a business basically. Okay, but they're not making profit. It's safekeeping for assets. Okay. All right, then I've given you an example here. Don't worry about this. All right. As I said, the focus isn't about calculating it. Okay, but I just want to show you what the assets are. Okay, so give me the assets. Okay, usufruct is the right to use a specific, let's say, asset or property, or it's just the right of use. Usufruct is a right of use. Let's say that's A as well, asset. Okay, equity investments, what is that?
That's also an
asset. Outstanding home loan, it's a liability. Liability, loans, liability. Okay, so if I look at this, what would my estate be? Assets minus liabilities. Okay, didn't put that there. Okay, so your A minus your L will give you the gross. Okay, those are allowable deductions. So what do? I subtract 500,000 because that's allowable deductions. Okay, then I get an amount and I subtract 3.5 million. Okay, anything after that will be multiplied by 20%, and that'll be the estate duty on that particular wealth. Okay. Well, they've made it more difficult for trusts to operate. Yeah, there's a lot of legislation that trusts need to follow. It's not easy to create a trust. You need lots of lawyers because you need to draw up all those contracts. Because a trust is it's treated like a natural person, all right, a special trust, but it's still almost like a company, if you will. Okay, so it's a very unique situation. Okay, it's very specialized. Yeah. Okay, and then choosing an estate planning technique. What do we need to do? We need to get professionals involved. Okay, we spoke about this. It's a specialized area. You need to get specialists involved. Okay, and if you're dealing with large estates, let's say you've got R1 billion. Okay, you don't want anyone managing that estate. You want professionals that are specialists in that area to manage your estate. If you've got R1 billion sitting in assets. Okay. Obviously, we need to look at different techniques or options available. We need to look at trust. Should we form one or not? Inter vivos is during your life, so you create a trust during your life. Or testamentary, the trust is created when you die. Okay, there's two scenarios. Okay, legal requirements and considerations. Law comes up here a lot. This is a very, very, very law-specific module. Okay, estate planning. Right, you do get offshore and local trusts, and obviously, we've got a will. Right, so what will be included in the will? What can we include in the will? You can include anything in your will. All right, you could even include like silly things, like where should your ashes be thrown, or where would you be buried, or must your dog and cat be looked after by who? And those types of things. You can have the strangest things in your will. Why? Because it's your last will and testament. Okay, so it's your wishes when dying. Okay, and the executor is normally responsible for doing that. Okay, for implementing it. Okay. Alright, so drawing up the necessary documents, what do we need? We need attorneys. We need specialists. We need CAs. We need brokers. Right, and then we obviously need to revise the estate plan. Why? What happens during our lives?
We acquire more assets.
Correct.
Things change. Families get together, break apart.
Good. Okay, so things change in terms of more assets. All right. So what happens? So we debated this the one semester. what happens? Let's say, okay, Robert, so you get married, okay? You love the woman, right? You put her in your will, okay? And you're very wealthy, right? Now, there's a dispute. She cheats on you, okay? You divorce her, all right? But you forget to update your will, all right? You get remarried. You have a new family. You love the woman. She's good to you. You have lots of kids with her. And now you pass. Okay? And your will currently still has your ex-wife in it. Okay? Who gets paid out?
The ex-wife.
Exactly. Okay, and your new family gets nothing if the will wasn't updated. Okay, so when do you update your will? When things change. Okay, so if you get married, you should update your will. Okay? If you have kids, you should update your will. If you get divorced, you should update your will. You should always update your will when there are big events happening. Okay, if you buy a new property, you should update your will.
Yes, you have to.
Okay.
So what happens if you buy a property, you don't put it in your will?
Well, then it'll law of succession. It'll go to your loved ones when you die. Okay.
Law of succession.
A succession.
Oh, succession.
Here's it. There's it. Interstate succession. Okay, it's succession. That's how they allocate your assets if you die and you don't have a will. Okay. Inefficient estate planning, that's a big problem. Okay, we need to plan for everything. We plan during our lives. We should plan when we die as well. Okay. All right, and then also here's another big note: cohabitation. So in today's world, if you live together with someone, okay, for an extended period of time, you could be seen as being, inverted commas, married to that individual. They could have what's the right word? An entitlement, okay, to your assets. Okay, so cohabitation. So you might say, well, let's just have a girlfriend forever and not ever get married. Okay, to avoid the problem with divorce. Okay, does that limit her rights to claim your assets if you do decide to leave her or die? No, it doesn't. Okay, cohabitation could be something that would be applicable there. Okay, so if you live too long with someone, you could be seen as being, inverted commas, like a partner with them. Okay, partnership, like a marriage type of thing. Okay, and they could have a claim on your assets. Okay. Right, and then remember, it's very specialized, so those are all the different acts that cover different points. So the Wills Act, interstate succession, estate duty, matrimonial, and so on.